Welcome to the Writer's Bone Podcast, everyone. I'm Daniel Ford.
And I'm Stephanie Ford.
And I'm Kelly J. Ford.
And I'm Friday Morning Coffee host Caitlin Malqui.
This literary podcast believes in the power of the written word. We believe that storytelling can excite us, educate us, and at its best, unite us.
Our mission is to promote authors of all backgrounds, races, creeds, and experiences. And we like to have some fun along the way. I've got the jokes and the giant glasses of wine.
Since 2014, we've had the privilege of talking to bestsellers, debut authors, screenwriters, actors and actresses, and so many others that embrace creative endeavors.
We hope you'll subscribe to the show and continue this journey with us because we have no intention of stopping anytime soon.
Keep writing, everyone, and enjoy the show.
Hey folks, welcome to the season finale of the Writer's Bone Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Ford. Today, we present the books and authors we loved in 2023. It's a long list, it's an eclectic list, it features some of our longtime favorites, it features some of our new favorites. Much like last year, my favorite part of producing this list is hearing from hosts from around the Writer's Bone Podcast Network, so that audio is sprinkled throughout this episode. We strongly urge you to pick up our recommendations at your local indie bookseller and subscribe to our shows. Check out the links in the show notes for easy reference. I'm sure we've missed hundreds of titles and authors, so help us out by dropping your favorites into the comments section of this post on our website, writersbone.com, or on any of our social media networks. One programming note before we jump to the break and then get started with the list. This marks the final episode in our main show run for 2023, but we've got one more Friday Morning Coffee coming up on December 29th, featuring E.J. Koh, author of The Liberators. After that, we're going to take a few weeks off and come back on January 16th with our friend and best-selling author, Jennifer Cation Armstrong, who is going to chat with us about her book, So Fetch, The Making of Mean Girls, and why we're so obsessed with it. I'll have more to say toward the end of the show, but in the meantime, we'll see you on the other end of the break. Happy reading, everyone.
Hi, my name's Louise Claire Johnson. I'm the author of Behind the Red Door, and I recently launched my own line of literary merch that if you're anything like me, a Gilmore Girls aficionado and lifelong bibliophile, I think you'll really enjoy. From cozy crewnecks to book club dad hats, I've designed the perfect pieces to curl up on the couch with a cup of tea and a good book, or sit at your desk penning the next great literary masterpiece, or even popping out to the library or bookstore. The pieces are all manufactured here in North America, with inclusive unisex sizing ranging from small to 5X, all packaged and personally shipped by me. So whether you're looking for a gift for yourself or the book lover in your life while supporting local, head to louiseclairejohnson.com/thebookshop to order online today. Happy reading!
We love local bookstores, which is why we love our sponsor, Libro FM, the first and only company that lets you purchase audiobooks directly from your local bookstore at the same price as other online audiobook sellers. Now that we're nestled into our official Writer's Bone HQ, we don't have a morning commute, but we do have plenty of writing to ignore. Why wouldn't you want to listen to great writing while you're staring into the abyss, trying to come up with your own? Some of our recent favorites include Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, Bob Odenkirk's comedy drama, Ricky by Howard Bryant, Susan Orleans' The Library Book, Black Boy Smile by D. Watkins, and Fight Like Hell by Kim Kelly. If you sign up for Libro FM right now and use the code WritersBone, you can get 2 audiobooks for the price of 1. Think about it. You can save some space on your bookshelf for some other print books that you can also get from your local independent bookseller. Once again, enter Writer's Bone, that's WRITERSBONE, all one word, at checkout for 2 for 1 audiobooks at Libro FM. keep reading and listening, I should say, so you can keep writing.
Hi, everyone. Mark Cecil here. I'm the host of The Thoughtful Bro Show, and I'm also a debut novelist. So when it comes to stories, I love three things: stories about mythic heroes, stories about America, and stories about personal transformation. My debut novel, Bunyan and Henry, or The Beautiful Destiny, has all three of those elements. First, it's a big-hearted epic about the friendship between white lumberjack Paul Bunyan and black steel-driving man John Henry. The book draws on myth for inspiration and interrogates American folklore. The book's also an exploration of our American character in all its outrageous glory and with all its unseemly warts. Finally, the book is a story about how one man changes his life, chasing at last the instinct he always had, but never quite followed. The book began as a bedtime story for my 4 young interracial children. See, I wanted to tell them a tale in which a black person and a white person could work together, just like their mom and dad. Over time, I reworked it into a kind of fairy tale for grown-ups. Matthew Quick, the best-selling author of The Silver Linings Playbook, called my book, quote, a hopeful, Twainian nod to brotherhood that puts the fun in profundity, even as it remixes American myth to the most sobering beats of our modern times. Again, I'm Mark Cecil, and my book is called Bunyan and Henry, or The Beautiful Destiny. It comes out March 26, 2024 from Pantheon. I hope you'll check it out. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Writer's Bone podcast, and I'm Daniel Ford. Let's start rattling off some books, shall we? These are in alphabetical order, but there's an argument to be made that our leadoff hitter is the book of the year. Beware the Woman by Megan Abbott, Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, Under the Tyriman Tree by Nigar Alum, Kind of a Big Deal, How Anchorman Stayed Classy and Became the Most Iconic Comedy of the 21st Century by Saul Austerlitz, King Hancock, The Radical Influence of a Moderate Founding Father by Brooke Barbier, Collisions of Power, Trump, Bezos, and the Washington Post by Martin Barron, The Writing Retreat by Julie Bartz, Dark Ride by Lou Berney, and this is one of my favorites of the year too, Ice, From Mixed Drinks to Skating Rinks, A Cool History of a Hot Commodity by Amy Brady, All the Beauty in the World by Patrick Bringley, At the Edge of the Woods by Catherine Bromwich, Bob Dylan, Mavericks of Music, Stories for Children by Daniel Budnick. Okay, maybe that's a Navy pick, who knows. No Crying in Baseball, The Inside Story of a League of Their Own, Big Stars, Dugout Drama, and a Home Run for Hollywood by Aaron Carlson. Whew, maybe our cover of the year. Man. The Christmas Wager by Holly Cassidy, A Small Sacrifice for an Enormous Happiness by Jah Chakrabarty, Hyde by Tracy Clark, When the Game Was War, The NBA's Greatest Season by Rich Cohen, Thicker Than Water by Megan Collins, The Art of Libromancy on Selling Books and Reading Books in the 21st Century by Josh Cook, All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby, The Rhythm of Time by S.A. Cosby, and yes, freaking Questlove, and the 1998 Yankees, The Inside Story of the Greatest Baseball Team Ever by Jack Curry. Our first guest host is Bianca Moraes, whose podcast, The Shit No One Tells You About Writing, remains one of our favorites, and I love how they've become such a hot pod in the literary space. Here's Bianca to tell us about the books she loved in 2023.
Hi there, all you fabulous Writer's Bone listeners. Daniel asked me if I would be prepared to come on the show and just give an overview of one or two of my favorite books. I'm Bianca Moraes. I'm the author of the best-selling The Witches of Moonshine Manor, as well as 2 other novels before that, Hum If You Don't Know the Words, and If You Want to Make God Laugh. And I'm a co-host on the popular podcast, The Shit No One Tells You About Writing, which is aimed at helping emerging writers get published. Besides being a writer, I'm also a voracious reader. I think it was my love of reading that made me become a writer. So I read a lot for pleasure. Besides that, I probably do about 5 author interviews on the podcast each week, and I have to read all the books ahead of that as well. So my to-be-read pile threatens to topple over and injure me at any given point. And it still just keeps getting higher and higher. So the 5 books that I loved the most this year, one is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I don't think it needs any introduction. I don't think any reader out there hasn't heard about it. People tend to love or hate this book. I just thought its wry sort of look at publishing and poking fun at publishing was really well done, besides the fact that the plot and the story were excellent. And if any of you have been following what's been happening on literary Twitter recently, a lot of that really resonated in Yellowface. So it felt like that was sort of anticipating something like that in terms of the fallout there. The other one that I really enjoyed was The Bandit Queens by Parini Shroff. This is a contemporary novel, takes place in India. It's really funny. It's a romp of a book. It's these women who are, in the small community who've had enough and who are now trying to get rid of their husbands, much like their hero, the Bandit Queen. Of course, lots of hijinks, things go wrong. It's a very funny book if you like dark humor, which I do. There's a lot of dark humor in it as well. Simmering below the surface is a lot of rage as well. A lot of social commentary on how women are treated in India. There's a lot there that you should be paying attention to as well, in between all the laughter. Then Hello Beautiful by Ann Napolitano. Again, it's not a book that you will not have heard of. Everybody has spoken about this book. I listened to it on audio during my morning walks, and it's actually one that I want to come back to and read. As much as I love listening to audio, I think sometimes there's something to be said for just looking at a page and reading the beautiful words. Then the next one's a short story collection called Holler Child by Latoya Watkins. It was longlisted for the National Book Award. It's about 12 stories that take place in communities, homes. It's about betrayal and being a Black woman in America. And it was just really, really incredible. So check that out. And then finally, The Future by Naomi Alderman. She wrote The Power, which I loved as well. The Future is wry, also darkly comedic, but gives so much to think about. There's so much there for a reader to unpack and to discuss. So if your book club loves that kind of thing, definitely pick that up. And those were my favorite books of the year. Thank you so much for letting me share this with your audience, Daniel.
Thank you, Bianca, and we look forward to all the good work you're going to do in 2024. We begin the next section of our best of list with The Last Beekeeper by Julie Carrick Dalton, The Way Life Should Be by William Dameron, The Loneliness Files by Athena Dixon, The Happy Couple by Nisha Dolan, A Fever in the Heartland, The Ku Klux Klan's Plot to Take Over America, and The Woman Who Stopped Them by Timothy Egan, Skull Water by Heinz Insu Venkel, Madalena by Julia Fine, Death Watch by Stona Fitch, Come With Me by Aaron Flanagan, My Last Innocent Year by Daisy Alpert Florin, The Hunt by Kelly J. Ford, The Long War on Drugs by Ann L. Foster, and thank you to Chatter on Books co-host David Aldridge for putting that one on our radar, Devil Makes 3 by Ben Fountain, The Wager by David Gran, Black Sheep by Rachel Harrison, Happy Place by Emily Henry, Wellness by Nathan Hill, 62, Aaron Judge, The New York Yankees, and The Pursuit of Greatness by Brian Hock, A Sleight of Shadows by Kat Howard, Pineapple Street by Jenny Jackson, Loot by Tanya James, Live from the Underground, A History of College Radio by Catherine Rye Jewell, Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones, The Longmire Defense by Craig Johnson, Those We Thought We Knew by David Joy, Black Folk, The Roots of the Black Working Class by Blair L.M. Kelly, For You and Only You by Carolyn Kepnes, What We Kept to Ourselves by Nancy Juan Kim, Mourning in This Broken World by Katrina Kittle, The Liberators by E.J. Koh, You Should Have Told Me by Leah Cohen, and this is probably essential reading for anyone in publishing, Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Mark Cecil, host of The Thoughtful Bro, has been such a welcome addition to our podcast network. I can't wait to talk to him about his debut novel, Bunyan and Henry, and at pubs in March. But in the meantime, listen to what's on his book radar.
Hey, Dan, Mark Cecil here. So I have 3 books I want to recommend for my 2023 reading. All 3 of these guests came on my show, which is called The Thoughtful Bro, where I do author interviews. And they were all wonderful interviews, and I just loved these books. The first is a book called Mavefly by C.J. Lead. And this book is completely out there. It is, first I want to say, a book of horror. And if you are not into horror or you have any trigger warning, squeamishness whatsoever, this book might not be for you. But if you do like philosophical femme fatales and you like really voicey, dark fiction, this might be for you. It was sort of somewhere between The Big Sleep and Dostoevsky. The first few pages of this book give you a real good idea of what the voice is and the tone of the book. I thought the first few pages of Mavefly were a real tour de force. And when you're done with the book, you will never look at a curling iron or a spoon or an eyeball, I must say, in quite the same way again. So check it out. That book is called Mavefly by debut author C.J. Lead. Very literary, boundary-pushing book of horror fiction. Great, wild, inimitable stuff. The next book is a book by an author called David Mura. It's a work of nonfiction. It's called The Story's Whiteness Tells Itself. And this book is an incredibly powerful and urgent primer on where the race conversation is today, in particular in regards to creating fictional narratives. I think this book is good for the general reader in terms of just trying to get a lay of the land for why is the conversation around race and representation so strong right now? Why is the question of own voices so important for this industry? Why is publishing going through something so intense right now where it just seems like you cannot spend more than 20 minutes on Twitter without the issue of race and the arts and that intersection coming up? This book, The Story's Whiteness Tells Itself, is all about the history in fiction and the history in our politics of how whiteness and blackness was represented in literature. It is just an astonishingly clear and persuasive book. And really, as I said, I'd recommend it to I almost say it's required reading for any author who's trying to write about race. And I would say this is a debatable point, but I almost feel that like you cannot write a story these days without talking about race. And even the avoidance of talking about race would itself be seen as a kind of choice and a kind of comment in the landscape we're in today. So, recommended, necessary reading for all artists trying to create narratives today that touch on race. And that might be just about every story there is. Okay, so my last book is not quite as under the radar as those two. It is the book called Wellness, a fictional work by Nathan Hill. It was called by NPR a masterpiece and beyond remarkable. This is a book about a couple who gets together in their 20s, and there is this extremely ecstatic meeting. And the first portion of this book, maybe the first 30 pages or so, was once a short story that Nathan Hill wrote that delved into this absolutely euphoric union between these two people who realize they are meant for each other. And Nathan Hill said he just sat on that story for a couple decades. And then he thought to himself, well, what would have happened to those people? Let's fast forward from this euphoric union at the beginning, and let's look at what it looks like in middle age when you have a kid and a mortgage and so on. It's a wonderful book. It's somehow at 600 pages was this page turner that I literally read in one day. I literally read a 600 page book in one day. And that's how compelling this was as a work of ideas, as a work of social commentary, as one of those big books about the way we live today. It's a book about the stories we tell ourselves to ourselves and how we represent ourselves to ourselves. And the stories that we tell about ourselves are, in a way, a psychological coping mechanism and a way to arrive at a feeling of wellness. And what happens when the stories we tell ourselves about our lives just aren't true. So I recommend that book so highly. It is one of these big books that's going to be around for a while. The book, again, is called Wellness by Nathan Hill. And those are my 3 books. Dan, I'm so happy to have been invited on the show. You do amazing work. And everybody have a great reading year in 2024.
Thanks, Mark. We hope you'll be thoughtfully bro-y in the new year. I look forward to having even more conversations about Nathan Hill's wellness the next time we get together. We continue with Big Gay Wedding by Byron Lane, Small Mercies by Dennis Lehane, Prom Mom by Laura Lippman, Walk the Darkness Down by Daniel McGarrigle, I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Mackay, The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride, The Revenge List by Hannah Mary McKinnon, Call and Response by Guthana Mowing, You Will Find Your People, How to Make Meaningful Friendships as an Adult by Lane Moore, Real Friends Talk About Race, Bridging the Gaps Through Uncomfortable Conversations by Iseult P. Muktabani and Hannah Summerhill, The Dream Builders by Andrina Mukherjee, Speech Team by Tim Murphy, Charm City Rocks by Matthew Norman, Housewoman by Adora Nawara, Gilmore Girls at Home by Nicole Ostow. Yes, Avery Ford may have had a hand in that, but also a very beautiful book. A Summer Morning by Anne Lee Parrish, Tom Lake by Ann Patchett, Cooking My Way by Jacques Pepin, The Sweet Spot by Amy Popel, Why We Love Baseball, A History in 50 Moments by Joe Poznansky, You Were Always Mine by Christine Pride and Joe Piazza, The Men Can't Be Saved by Ben Perkert, The Literary Undoing of Victoria Swan by Virginia Pai, Advika and the Hollywood Wives by Kirthana Ramasetti, Go as a River by Shelley Reed, The House in the Pines by Anna Reyes, The Kirschbaum Lectures by Seth Rogoff, The Celebrants by Stephen Rowley, Evil Eye by Etaf Rum, Look for Me There, Grieving My Father, Finding Myself by Luke Russert, Somebody's Fool by Richard Russo, of course, and Burn It Down, Power, Complicity, and a Call for Change in Hollywood by Maureen Ryan. Melanie Paget Powers, host of Deliberate Freelancer, is up next with her book recommendation. The floor is all yours, Melanie.
Hi, everyone. This is Melanie Paget Powers. My favorite book that I read this year, that was also published this year, is called Beyond That, the Sea by Laura Spence Ash. This is so different from what I usually read. I read a lot of dark books, and I very rarely read historical fiction. But this is a lovely, fantastic historical fiction book. The book starts off during World War II, but don't let that stop you. I know there are a lot of World War II historical fiction books out there, and some all have sort of the same tone or sound to them, but this is different, I promise. It's different in its storytelling, tone, and structure, and World War II is just the jumping off point. The book is centered around Beatrix. She is an 11-year-old British girl whose mother and father sent her to the United States at the beginning of the war to protect her from the bombs falling in London. You may have heard of families who sent away their children to the English countryside during the Blitz, but what you might not know is that some British parents sent their kids as far away as the US and Canada, sometimes to friends, but often to strangers who volunteered to take in the children. And what we as readers know, but that these parents could not know, is just how long the war would last. This is during the time when travel meant a long voyage on a ship from England to North America, and soon even that would become dangerous because German U-boats patrolled the waters. So it was nearly impossible for parents to visit their children during those years in North America. In actuality, Beatrix's parents sent their British child off to safety, and they get back an American teenager 5 years later. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When Beatrix lands in Boston, she's taken in by the lovely Gregory family. Mother Nancy, father Ethan, a son William, who is 2 years older than Bea, as the new family calls her, and son Gerald, who is 2 years younger than Bea. Bea is quiet and polite at first, and she really misses her parents, Millie and Reginald, but she's also angry at her mother because she blames her for sending her away. But she also instantly connects with her 2 new brothers. The beauty of this book for me is that everyone is lovely. This is not a story where you're waiting for the horrible people in Boston to not take care of her, for her to suffer abuse, or to be so desperately lonely. No, it's a story about love. Bea lives in Boston with the Gregorys for 5 years until she's 16, and that is a tremendously important time in a child's life. Bea is heartbroken to leave her new family, but she also yearns to see her parents and to go back to London. The book follows Bea after the war and throughout her life as she tries to navigate being from both worlds, always missing one family and not always fitting in wherever she lives. The chapters are short, and we get chapters written from the viewpoints of everyone in the book, so we hear from Bea, the boys, and all 4 parents. I really like that structure because, of course, what an 11-year-old girl is thinking and feeling is not always what the parents are thinking and feeling or the reality of the situation. For example, I mentioned she was furious at her mother for sending her away. She blames her mother. She never sees her dad as the bad guy, and she can't even think about how difficult that decision must have been for her parents. This is a coming-of-age story. It's a story about living through and surviving war and making impossible decisions. It's a story about not feeling at home in the world, but it's mostly a story about love and family. I cherished all of these people and this book, so I encourage you to pick up Beyond That, the Sea by Laura Spence Ash.
Thank you, Melanie. Look forward to more insights into the freelancer life in 2024. Next on our list is The Birth Parents by Frank Santo, Information Desk by Robin Schiff, Naked in the Rideshare, Stories of Gross Miscalculations by Rebecca Shaw and Ben Crowengold, The Hidden Life of Esther Kelly by Catherine A. Sherbrooke, Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld, Pieces of Blue by Holly Goldberg Sloan, Salvage This World by Michael Ferris Smith, You Could Make This Place Beautiful by Maggie Smith, Women We Buried, Women We Burned by Rachel Louise Snyder, Bruce Springsteen, A Little Golden Book Biography by Laurel Snyder. Tell you what, that Avery Ford has impeccable taste. Here in the Dark by Alexis Selasky, Making It So by Patrick Stewart, and Saturday Night at the Lakeside Supper Club by J. Ryan Stradle. You didn't think we'd really put this episode together without Daniel Paisner, did you? Talk about cooking with gas. Paisner is on an absolute heater with his show As Told To, the Ghostwriting Podcast. And that's a good thing because his Mets have struck out in free agency. What a shame. We cut up to him just after he was wandering in an airport without the supervision of his grandchildren.
Hey there, folks. This is Daniel Paisner, host of As Told To, the Ghostwriting Podcast, reaching you from across the Writer's Bone Podcast Network, sharing my year in reading experiences for 2023, highlights from my year in reading, that is. And I thought I'd frame this entry by sharing the very first book I read this calendar year and the very last, the one I'm now setting down here in the last gasp of December. You know, because of the work I do as a ghostwriter, I read an awful lot of celebrity memoirs, even more these days once I started the podcast working with our producer, Daniel Ford, trying to keep in touch and keep on top of the books written by my guests before they appear on our show. And it was with that in mind that I reached for the audio edition of Selma Blair's memoir, Mean Baby, a memoir of growing up, which actually came out in 2022, but I was a little bit late to it. I listened to this book. I'm in the habit these days of listening to some of these celebrity memoirs, most especially when they're read by the author. And that was the case here. And I must tell you, I was blown away by Selma's account. She turns out to be a hell of a writer. Her story is interesting, it's compelling, it's surprising, it's heartbreaking and funny. I can't recommend this book more highly. It really is terrific. And if you have an opportunity and if you have the time to listen to it, I would encourage you to do so. That's Selma Blair's Mean Baby. She writes with candor and great good cheer about some pretty heavy, harrowing stuff, but she writes with clarity and humor, and her voice and personality really leap off the page. In this case, it leapt off of my phone and into my ear. But do spend some time with this book if you can. I'm closing out the year with what I'm inclined to call a guilty pleasure, but it's really not that, because there's nothing to feel guilty about. I'm reading Stephen King's book, Billy Summers. One of my favorite things to do before I hop on a long plane ride is to walk through the airport bookstore and pick a Stephen King book off the book rack. And this book sort of shouted out to me. I kind of missed it. I was asleep at the switch. I wasn't paying full attention when this book came out in 2021. The paperback edition came out in 2023. And what I loved about this book, in addition to having all the trappings of a great page-turning Stephen King thriller, in this book, Stephen King writes at length about writing, something he does particularly well. It's a book that's filled with darkness and evil. It's about it's told primarily from the point of view of an assassin who also is a budding writer. And we get to learn through his eyes and his experiences what the writing means to him and how it is able to liberate him from some of the darkness in his rearview mirror that seems to be gaining on him. Once again, not a guilty pleasure, nevertheless, quite a pleasure. Stephen King's Billy Summers, Selma Blair's Mean Baby. It's been quite a year. Keep reading, folks.
That was Daniel Paisner, host of As Told To, the Ghostwriting Podcast. You can run and subscribe to his show right after we finish up the rest of our list, starting with Super Bloom by Megan Tatey, Congratulations, The Best Is Over by R. Eric Thomas, In the Upper Country by K. Thomas, Late Bloomers by Deepa Varadarajan, Let Us Descend by Jasmine Ward, Strangers in the Night by Heather Webb, The War Begins in Paris by Theodore Wheeler, Saying It Loud, 1966, the year Black Power challenged the Civil Rights Movement by Mark Whitaker, On Great Fields, The Life and Unlikely Heroism of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain by Ronald C. White Jr., City of Dreams by Don Winslow, Busy Betty in the Circus Surprise by Reese Witherspoon, Master Slave Husband Wife, An Epic Journey from Slavery to Freedom by Elian Wu, Dearborn by Ghazan Zenedine, and finally, last but very much not least, Small World by Laura Zigman. Before we sign off for the year, I wanted to say how grateful I am for the smart, industrious, creative, warm, thoughtful, and generous host throughout the Writer's Bone Podcast Network, many of whom you've heard throughout this episode. When I started putting this together, I thought I was going to run out of days in the year, and I didn't think I'd have the mental bandwidth to assemble these clips and appropriately catalog the incredible work done by authors in 2023. And then I got the following audio from Tom, co-host of the Movie Loft podcast. I mentioned in an episode not too long ago that podcasters should savor the gifts they get while producing their shows. What comes next is indeed a gift, one that became my lodestar in crafting the episode that you've been listening to. We're going to give Tom the final words of 2023 here at Writer's Bone. Here's hoping we have plenty more to read, to cherish, to challenge, and, of course, to write in 2024. I'm Daniel Ford. Keep writing, everyone.
Okay, so as far as a favorite read goes, I think I'll bypass my Bing Crosby tome, The War Years, 1940 to 1946. It was certainly my most sustained joy throughout the year and my biggest accomplishment. But being the holiday season and the end of the year, I thought I'd go with something a little bit more poignant, something that reminds me of the mother that I don't have anymore, and that I was lucky enough to have as long as I did. A mother who was left with 5 children in 1978 between the ages of 7 and 14. A mother who worked 3 jobs and put herself through community college to get a job with the phone company because she was a cashier at Star Market when she was left high and dry. A mother that bought a rooming house to keep her 5 kids together under one roof and rented out all the driveway spaces. So you lose a parent and a lot of things come into focus, especially when you existed in sustained chaos. That focus can be the hindsight that is a little bittersweet, and you find a lot of the lessons that she somehow taught you and you did not realize or pick it up in the time it was happening. And this is a poem that always reminds me of her. I don't know what kind of poem it is. I have no idea how to read a poem well, and I haven't pre-read this to prepare. It's a poem called Good Bones by Maggie Smith. Life is short, though I keep this from my children. Life is short, and I've shortened mine in 1,000 delicious, ill-advised ways. 1,000 deliciously ill-advised ways I'll keep for my children. The world is at least 50% terrible, and that's a conservative estimate, though I keep this from my children. For every bird, there is a stone thrown at a bird. For every loved child, a child broken, bagged, sunk in a lake. Life is short, and the world is at least half terrible. And for every kind stranger, there is one who would break you, though I keep this from my children. I am trying to sell them the world. Any decent realtor, walking you through a real shithole, chirps on about good bones. This place could be beautiful, right? You could make this place beautiful.
Thank you for listening to the Writer's Bone podcast. You can listen to past episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, and Amazon Podcast. Really, any podcast channel known to man. You can find more literary goodness on our website, writersbone.com. Also check out the other shows within the Writer's Bone podcast network, such as Pop Literacy, Film Freaks Forever, As Told To, the Ghostwriting Podcast, The Shit No One Tells You About Writing, and Deliberate Freelancer. Learn more about WBPN under the network section in the main nav of our website. Once again, thank you for listening, and keep writing.